Just like everyone on the planet during the 2020 lockdown period, I was constantly searching the internet for something that can distract me from the harsh reality. But after a while, rather than looking for the new manga like I used to do, I turned back to the old titles like Dragon Ball to experience the entire series once again, and suddenly began learning to appreciate the brilliance of the manga and its author, Akira Toriyama. What can I say about Dragon Ball that hasn't been said by others? For many, it's the thing that introduced them into the world of anime and manga in the first place. The art style, the story, the character design, and the transformation that inspired thousands upon thousands of children to pick up their pen and create their own stories. Dragon Ball does, indeed, belong to another level of greatness. My introduction to Dragon Ball is also similar yet also different in a lot of ways. It wasn't my first exposure to this Japanese culture at all. Like a lot of children in Asia, my first experience is with Doraemon, a story about a robot in the future returning to the past to help a schoolboy in his daily life. Then Detective Conan, a mystery crime-solving manga that can only end when you kill the protagonist, and some other generic titles like Glass Mask, Crest of the Royal Family, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Each of them has a very distinct art style and interesting plot for sure, but Dragon Ball is something else. I still remember vividly like yesterday that the first page of Dragon Ball I read in my local rental store during my first or second year of elementary school was a scene in which Goku and Chi-Chi met again during a tournament. And then for some reasons, after knocking her out, Goku marries her. Then I pick up another volume and suddenly, there was a long-haired dude wearing a sort of armor with no pant that appears in front of our protagonist, and said that they were aliens coming to destroy the planet. Then the green dude nearby got drawn into the fight, and then again, for some reasons, our supposedly protagonist dies. And then the monkey dude announced that there are another two dudes who are stronger than him that will come and revenge for him. The green dude then answered that Goku will revive soon due to something called Dragon Balls, which can grant any wishes to those who collect 7 of them. As if not wanting to surrender, the monkey dude threatened him that his comrades are listening to what they are saying through his scouter and now, they will use that information to the fullest. No need to say, just a little bit of that conversation is enough to hook a child by getting a first taste at how chaotic the story tends to progress in Dragon Ball. Every action is motivated by some kinds of intentions. And the act of creating art is not very far from this rule. The artist, or in this case, manga artist, either writes with a specific plan in mind, or lets his mind run free and wanders aimlessly in his own world. Akira Toriyama seems to be the second type. Anyone who reads Dragon Ball will understand how chaotic the story would be sometimes. It tends to go in whatever direction the author is feeling at the time. At first, it's an adventure story with an emphasis on searching for the legendary Dragon Balls. Then it turns into a full-on martial arts manga, something he always loved, with a lot of time spent on trainings and tournaments that are used to express a heavy theme on brotherhood and growing up while also searching for Dragon Balls. But then he got bored, and the series officially turns into a sci-fi. To legitimize this decision, some of the characters are now aliens, and they have to fight other aliens to prevent them from taking the Dragon Balls. But then he got bored again, and the series goes back to being an adventure story. But the difference being that defeating the bad guys is now the main goal, the Dragon Balls are just the side quest. Because honestly, the villains are so strong that saying they need Dragon Balls to get stronger is a little bit disrespecting, even to monsters like them. And to be frank, nobody cares. Why? Because it's interesting, that's all. It's a real testament to Akira's skill as a writer. And perhaps, even as an artist. And that is something I really want to talk about in this video. Dragon Ball has a really simple plot, a little bit too simple to be honest. Our characters are the strongest in town, but then they run into someone stronger, so they have to train hard to surpass that wall. But then when they defeat that villain, there would suddenly be another one coming who is stronger, so they have to train even harder to break it. And when everything is over, repeat that formula over a couple hundred times, and you got the basic plot of Dragon Ball. But even though it's that simple, hardly any fans who read the manga has any problems with it. And in order to make the plot even simpler, Akira also rarely mentions any of the characters' flashback, which is something ubiquitous nowadays. Obviously, it's hard to make any character development without knowing anything about them. But the brilliant thing about Akira is that he made the impossible possible. The key lies in how every character in the series pushes the plot forward through fighting and their confidence in their ability as a martial artist. That's why it feels totally natural when a fight happens in Dragon Ball, and it's also kinda expected when one of them got humiliated in a fight. After all, they are constantly training to be strong and they pursue recognition from others through that strength alone. Seeing that effort going to waste is equal to admitting that all the trade-offs they made to get there is useless. All the time, all the emotion, and all the expectation that motivates them to be a better version of themselves. This kind of dynamic interaction is simultaneously a cause and effect of every important change in the series, whether it was revenge, hatred, or regret. Fighting is their way of life, a means to prove themselves and to communicate with each other. Therefore, oftentimes in Dragon Ball, the boundary between good and bad among the fighters is not very clear, because each of them holds a certain level of respect to each other in terms of prowess. The real villains, to Akira Toriyama, are those with huge strength and skill but look down on those who don't, or use it for other purposes outside of improving the art itself. Every famous franchise usually has its own structure, and Dragon Ball is no exception. A typical saga in Dragon Ball will always start with a smaller arc, in which Akira will either introduce us to new characters, create lore, or perhaps build tension for the series. This gives the readers a decent time to feel and prepare for something even bigger in the story. The Frieza Saga and the Cell Saga, two of the best sagas considered by fans of the series, also follow this structure. Before the Frieza Saga begins, we have a decent Saiyan arc in which we are introduced to the Saiyan race, the Namek race, and the existence of something called the Super Saiyan, a legend about the strongest warrior in the universe passing down among the Saiyans. The arc then ends with the complete yet devastating victory for the Z warriors. This is then becoming the motivation for the group to travel to Namek and use the Dragon Balls there to revive their fallen comrades. We then get the explanation for why some Namekians like Kami and Piccolo decide to travel to the Earth, who are the people that Vegeta is working for, and the big boss of the arc, Frieza himself. In the Cell Saga, this method is taken to the next level. When the previous saga, the Frieza Saga, ends, we meet Trunks, a strong warrior from the future, who gives the Z fighters a warning about the two androids that will appear 2 years later and kill all of them. This motivates the Z fighters to get stronger as quickly as possible, and they did manage to overpower the two androids. Yet to their surprise, and even Trunks' surprise, they are not the two androids being mentioned. The real ones, number 18 and number 17, now plus number 16, a model that only exists in this timeline, are even stronger than they are in the timeline that Trunks came from, and guess what? They never get tired. Meaning the longer the group fights, the more disadvantaged they are. In fact, the androids are so overpowered that they completely annihilate the whole group, including Vegeta and Trunks, the two legendary Super Saiyans, with ease. However, contrary to the expectations, the androids do not kill any members of the group after defeating them, and neither do they kill nor harm anyone on their way to find Goku, who is the only person that they are interested in killing. This completely shocks the entire group, especially Trunks, who are both overwhelmed with the fact that they are stronger in this timeline than they are in his own, and the fact that they are not the mindless killing machines that he knows. But obviously, this doesn't change the fact that they are extremely dangerous, and there is also no guarantee that they won't find another target after killing Goku. So now, the entire group has to find a way to get stronger, and one person in particular, Piccolo, knows exactly what he needs to do. The Android's arc ends with a really big cliffhanger like that. It makes us, the readers, feel unease as we cannot predict what would happen next in the storyline, as the enemy they are facing right now is not the one they can handle at the moment. And it is from this feeling that the author, Akira Toriyama, decided to exploit to the full extent in the next arc. From what has been foreshadowed in the Frieza saga, we know that if Piccolo and Kami, who used to be one person but then divided into two, decide to rejoin again, then they would be stronger than Frieza. And this is exactly what Piccolo is aiming for. Kami both agrees and disagrees with this idea. He agrees because the enemy they have to face is indeed very strong. And Piccolo right now is not as evil as his father, so he wouldn't use the power he gains for himself anymore. However, he disagrees with Piccolo on who exactly they should be fighting against, because from what he has seen, the androids haven't done anything bad to them. In fact, the Z fighters are the ones who attack the androids first, not the opposite. And there's one more reason in particular why he doesn't think the androids are a threat, and that is because there is actually a bigger threat than the androids, which can definitely bring about the apocalypse of the world. And just like the readers, Piccolo is curious about what the threat Kami is talking about exactly is. But Kami says that he will know once they rejoin. The arc then decides to move on with other characters to see what they're doing. The androids, now being free for such a long time, decide to take it easy and drive a car to enjoy their journey, while the Z fighters quickly bring Goku and his family to another safe place. During the flight, however, Bulma tells Trunks that her company has figured out something that looks just like the time machine that he has used to travel back to this timeline, just not in a very good shape. Trunks says that is impossible because he has always brought the machine with him under the capsule form, and Bulma in his timeline can only make one machine at best. Yet he is also surprised to find out that it does indeed look just like his machine. He then decides to visit the place, together with Bulma and Gohan, to investigate the area. At the scene, Trunks does confirm that this machine is indeed his machine because it has the signature that he wrote when he left that timeline. And just like what it looks like in the photo, the machine does seem to be there for a very long time. It has a giant hole on top as if it has been melted from high temperature from the inside. But the most surprising part, however, comes from an eggshell that appears to arrive from 3 years later than when Trunks came from and arrive in this timeline 4 years ago. Meaning it came back just a year before the last time he came, and probably is the reason that history has changed that much. The three of them then find out a shed skin of a big cicada nearby that probably came out of that egg. And whatever that thing is, it definitely just left the shell. Trunks and Gohan then realize by key that a place nearby is under attack, and later on, as she flies back home, Bulma hears on the radio about the mysterious disappearance of the inhabitants of a small suburb near the place they found the time machine. She then tells Krillin to turn on the TV so that when Trunks and Gohan come back, they can know exactly what's going on. Seeing the clothes and weapon without a corpse, Krillin initially thinks it's the androids who did so, but Bulma dismisses the idea. Trunks and Gohan then enter the house right when the news continue on with the report about the sound of a gun nearby just suddenly getting quiet, and then when the reporter tries to get closer and closer to figure out what is going on, he disappears. We then cut back to Kami, who quickly tells Piccolo to rejoin without hesitation. After that, Piccolo immediately understands what is going on and arrives at the scene on TV in an instant. In front of his eyes, the place is now completely quiet. Only the sound of the wind remains. There is evidence that people do indeed live here just now, but then disappear for some mysterious reasons. He then turns his back, and what awaits him is the culprit behind all of this. And thus begins Cell Saga, one of the most famous sagas in Dragon Ball. By using these kinds of accidents, Akira can suddenly push the plot of the whole story in a completely unexpected direction, creating many scenarios in which characters themselves are constantly forced to either surrender or deal with the problem head-on. But putting aside the grand scheme that Akira often set up and make us surprised, I think one small thing that seems insignificant yet magnificent about Dragon Ball is the way Akira handles flashbacks. Previously, I said that in Dragon Ball there are very few flashbacks. But that doesn't mean there aren't any. Although I have to say, in this aspect, Toriyama also proves to be a master himself. Unlike a lot of mangas nowadays, which tend to use a lot of flashbacks to create some depth for the story and to make the entire story as well as the world the characters live in feel relevant in some ways, Dragon Ball doesn't seem to contain a lot of them. Usually, when a character remembers something from the past, Akira would either spend a page at most to talk about it if it's something we have no idea about, or he will let the character narrate the story themselves instead of showing the old panels one more time. This does well for different reasons, the first being if the flashback doesn't take too long, then we, the readers, can quickly get back to the story without having our emotion of the current events interrupted. A thing that often occurs with many weekly mangas. The second reason is that if Akira decided to use a chapter or more to draw flashbacks of a certain character, then the readers may expect something similar to occur if we happen to run into another character like that in the future. I know a certain manga where people freak out when the strongest villain of the series up to that point doesn't live up to the expectations simply just because his flashback isn't as interesting as other villains. The last and probably most unique reason to why Dragon Ball chose to let the characters narrate the past events is that when they do so, we have a chance to get a glimpse into their personality. This can be used to show how smart a character is from the way they decide what to remember. Like the time when the Z Warriors are upset about the loss of their comrades from the fight with the Science, we can see that Krillin is extremely calm and tells other people that there is still a way to revive them. Later on, as he talks about the conversation he had earlier in the morning with the Science about Piccolo, the Namekian and the Dragon Ball, he notices that they did say something very interesting later on when knowing Goku is alive. If the information is true, then we will just go to Namek and get Dragon Balls that are even more powerful. And immediately, they understand what he means. This gives the group a sense of hope, a motivation and a new mission to complete. Or sometimes this method can be used to show the burst of emotions from another as they decide to let out all the things that they keep deep down in their heart. Like the time when Vegeta begs Goku, someone he considers to be an enemy, to defeat Frieza for him, telling him how much he did for Frieza. Yet Frieza just doesn't care about him, and the Scion at the end of the day. It is his emotions that strengthens Goku's will to fight Frieza, not just for himself but for the Scion race as a whole. And sometimes, just to prove how determined a character is at breaking up with their past, Akira would decide to not include any mention of their past at all. Take Android 18 for instance. After absorbing Android 17, Cell uses his voice to trick 18 into believing that letting him absorb her is a good idea, that this is something Dr. Gero, their creator, would definitely want too. But then she rejects that idea, saying that she and Android 17 hates Drive Gero to the bone, so there is no way that 17 would tell her that he likes Dr. Gero. If this is a certain manga that I know, then here the author would spend 3 or even 5 chapters as flashback to tell us about her past, how she used to be an innocent child, what she dreamt to become in the future, how hard it was for her to grow up as a kid, and then at the end, finishing by saying that she wants to live. But Akira decides to not do so. Android 18 says that she hates Dr. Gero and she won't do it. That's enough. There is nothing more we need to know about, and it should be so. This is a fighting manga, so people should fight, not talking to each other, and definitely not wasting our time to talk about their past. To me, there are 2 instances, or 2 flashbacks, that I remember fondly. The first one is when Raditz tells Goku that their home planet was destroyed by a meteor, so returning to their home was no longer an option. But he said that with a very cold and indifferent attitude, showing how the Scion truly cares about nothing but fighting. The second is when Popo tells Bulma about Kami's sad past. How he got here the Earth as a child. How he waited painfully for his parents in many years but they never come. How he gave up that hope but still returned from time to time to check whether there was anything different, but the result is still the same. And when he travels around the world, he began to notice the difference between him and the people there, especially his own home with all of his weird feature. The flashback then cuts back to the present where we are shown how advanced of a technology his home, which is actually a spaceship, really is. Here, the flashback is used as a tool to legitimize the appearance of a plot device to push the story forward. The character talking about it isn't that important. But whenever I reread the series, Kemi's flashback has always been stuck with me as I keep imagining how lonely he must have been, waiting for 20 or even 30 years in a strange planet, only to receive not a single bit of information about his family. Again, Akira can spend more time with that flashback. But he doesn't, and maybe that's the best. Sometimes less is more. We can know about it and move on with the big picture, or we can stay at the page for a moment and sympathize with the character at a human level. In the end, no matter what happens, life must go on. While Dragon Ball definitely has a good plot thanks to Akira's excellent writing skill, I think the characters, especially the villains of the series, are what impressed the readers the most. Although villains in Dragon Ball have quite a reputation among the modern-day manga readers for being a little bit simplistic or one-note, it's still amazing about the way Akira manages to tell us everything about these famous villains, who are the driving force of the saga, within just an arc, contrary to the monsters often depicted in the old tales. The main villains in Dragon Ball have a very nice and somewhat elegant design to them. Nothing threatening seems to come from their appearances. In fact, even the way they speak to our main characters also feels very mature, as they don't actively look for trouble or enemies, and in most cases, they just want to fight with the strongest, just like our protagonists. What is even more surprising is the fact that Akira can manage to let them grow right in the arc, yet somehow, this is the main reason that leads to their downfall. Take Frieza for instance. After collecting all the 7 Dragon Balls, he doesn't know how to make his wish come true, so he decides to ask any Namekian he can find on the planet. And on the way to the Grand Elder, he runs into Dende, a young Namekian, but decides to ignore him because he thinks it would be better if he asks someone older. This is a deadly flaw, because normally that would make sense, especially if you're in a hurry. But right here what he doesn't know is that it is Dende who are given the mission to tell Krillin and Gohan the code, not Nail. He also has the tendency to play with his prey rather than kill them as quick as possible, causing him to not pay attention to the surrounding area very often. Later on in the arc, as he gets severely wounded by the spirit bomb, he decides to get rid of all of his enemies, yet still likes to play with Goku by leaving him at last. This proves to be a big mistake, as his action is the reason that awakens the legendary Super Saiyan inside Goku, which is the thing that he fears the most. We can also recall the same thing with Cell. During the first encounter with Vegeta and Trunks, he decides to not kill them despite completely annihilating both of them. This could be seen as an act of honor, because if it weren't for Vegeta, then Cell wouldn't be able to reach his perfect form. Yet later on in the manga, when reviving from his suicide attempt and being overjoyed by his new power, he decides to get rid of it and kill Trunks just for fun. This enrages Vegeta, who later on would distract him during his final showdown with Gohan, which then creates an opportunity for Gohan to finish Cell once and for all. Illogical as it may be, Akira actually leaves us a lot of clues so that we can explain why the character of Frieza and Cell do what they do. In the case of Frieza, he is a leader, so he prioritizes the big picture, or the main objective, over the minor details, letting him to ignore Den to focus on the Grand Elder and Nail, who are supposed to hold a lot more information. And because he is too strong, he is often too arrogant, wasting time in the process just to have some fun. No one has ever come close to defeating him, so he just likes to see his opponents struggle to kill him. Therefore, when there is a possibility that someone is able to do so, he suddenly becomes scared and begins to get serious. As for Cell, we already know that the only thing he is programmed to do is to reach his perfect form. Anything else doesn't matter. So when his objective comes true, suddenly he doesn't know what to do. Being the strongest at that point, he stops caring about anything, including himself, so he decides to take a rather destructive path. To prove that no one can defeat him and probably to enjoy the terrors on people's faces, he opens a tournament and tells the entire humanity to come and kill him, and if they couldn't, then he will kill them. However, when there is indeed a person who can kill him, he suddenly doesn't accept it and flip the table just like a kid. And the irony is that only when he dies does he realize the joy of living, the value of his existence. This is when he takes the opposite road of Frisia, who likes to play with his opponents only then to get serious. Cell begins as a serious fighter, later on ends up as a kid who likes to play. Dragon Ball is a manga, so obviously the medium is used to portray the story is just as important as the story itself. And in my own opinion, very few manga artists can reach such a high level of illustration like what Akira Toriyama did with Dragon Ball. When we go into detail about what makes the art of Dragon Ball so special, we can break it down into 3 different components: the vibe of the series, the choreography of a fight, and the art of creating panels, something that only exists in the medium of manga. The Dragon Ball manga can be divided into 2 parts that are greatly different from each other. And although the second part has a better reputation for being more mature in tone and execution, I think the first one has done a pretty good job at setting up the world of Dragon Ball in general. Here, we are introduced to a world that has a combination of both Eastern and Western culture, a world where prehistoric dinosaurs live right next to the modern society, and a world where mystical tools like a stick that can change its length and a cloud that can transport people, existing side by side, a world with high-tech devices that can turn anything into a small pill, and spaceships that allow human as well as other beings to travel to different planets. Death may be the end in other mangas, but in Dragon Ball, the world of the dead exists side by side the world of the living. It's as if there was no such thing called boundary in Dragon Ball, and with each arc passing by, we are constantly amazed at how far Akira can stretch both his world and the story of Dragon Ball as a whole. From China with Journey to the West and Jackie Chan movies, to America with the Terminator and Alien franchise, Akira combines everything that interests him as a normal human and tells us through his art. Everything does look like they are being mixed randomly and quite confusing, yet somehow by putting Goku, our protagonist, at the center of these arcs, they all connect nicely with each other. He's the survivor from the genocide that Frisia planned on his planet, and he's the reason that the Red Ribbon fails to conquer the world, and Dr. Gero decides to revenge by creating the androids. There may be some countries and currency in the world of Dragon Ball, but Akira never went too deep into these matters. We never know exactly what country the current arc takes place in, nor do we know anything about the politics or conflicts happening in that world. All we know is that there are some kinds of organized crime existing on Earth and in the galaxy. But in the end, Goku got rid of all of them. The most recurrent conflict in daily life that happens in Dragon Ball is that between Goku and his wife, Chi-Chi, who always wants him to get a decent job and not bring his son into any fights, which is quite understandable. Other than that, the series hardly talks about these normal daily conflicts among different people in a society. And because of that, it always has a sense of optimism that as long as we can defeat the big bad guy, then we can go back to our normal good life without any further issues. One of the best things that nearly any readers of Dragon Ball will agree on is how clean and clear the art actually is. We can always tell what his characters are doing and what he is trying to achieve with his drawing. As I revisit the series, one thing stands out immediately if you read it slowly and have a basic knowledge on making manga is his very simple, if not too simple, art style. Aside from the inking on the characters, he rarely uses black color on anywhere else. In the event that he needs to color the background like the trees or the shadow of a person, he would simply do some hatching or cross-hatching to fill in the blank. While it's true that Japanese manga has always been in black and white for the ease of production and distribution, a lot of artists before and after Akira have always been trying to find many ways to work around this difficulty to increase the level of contrast and realism in their manga. Meaning there is still black and white in their manga, but there is different kind of black and white, or different value I should say. Akira Toriyama, on the other hand, doesn't seem to think the same way. You may call him lazy, Although that may be true considering he only finished his job during the last minute, it still doesn't deny the fact that the art he created still holds up even after more than 3 decades after their release. Other mangakas can create great art and picture for sure, but a manga can't just have great art. It has to coexist with the story in order to make a great manga. Making a realistic artwork is not their job, and neither was making a beautiful one. That was the job of the animators, who would improve on your art down the line. Their job is to make an explosion more than just an action. A destruction goes hand in hand with desperation, and the speed flows in the right direction. To let their characters become the one who tells the story, makes decisions and overcome challenges on their own. To create a world that seemingly breathes and lives with every page you flip. Anything that a mangaka does. They do it to make it easier for readers to digest and understand. Simple as his drawing is, that doesn't mean his art is not beautiful. Aside from his unique concept art in terms of how the aliens and their spaceships look, which adds a level of depth to the series, another big contribution to the unique vibe of Dragon Ball is the way Akira Toriyama portrays the deadly silence of a fight. In order to let us fully engage in the fight, he will often let his characters pick a place that has no living beings whatsoever nearby to avoid causing any harm. The sounds from the destruction of inanimate objects and the human bodies that we hear from the fights also add another layer of danger to those fights. This is why a lot of important fights in the series usually happens in some rocky mountains or some vacant areas with an incredible level of detail. And contrary to modern-day manga artists, who will often intentionally leave the background just entirely white or black to save time, Akira actually spends some time on drawing some small details of the scene in order to always help us have a sense of space. This can be either the floor of a building, some rocks that our characters fall into, or simply just some trees and cloud nearby is enough, and to add to the brutality of a fight. Dragon Ball also features some of the most memorable death scenes I've ever seen in manga. The most popular method of killing he often portrays are either chopping head or creating a hole in someone's body. Letting people explode is also another creative method he can think of, but less frequent, except from a laser beam attack. So unlike a certain manga I know, when Akira draws someone dead by an attack, then it means they're dead, no further explanations needed. And more than that, for some reasons, Akira can draw some of the best destruction scenes to this date. The success can be largely attributed to, again, the insane level of details, and sometimes also to the depictions of natural disasters like thundering, flooding and earthquakes, included in the background. This is probably the reason why the Frisia saga is well beloved among the fanbase, as it captures so well the beauty that only a planet exploding in the next 5 minutes can present. The final contribution I think he did to the series is how often body languages are used instead of dialogue to describe what the characters want to say. For instance, if the characters nod their heads, then that means they agree with the idea. If they smirk, then they are getting excited. And if they stare at each other, then you know they are provoking a fight. Sometimes, the character doesn't even have any words nor expressions, thus leaving the door open for interpretation. This works for multiple reasons. The first being getting rid of dialogue bubble, and special effects means he can use those space to add in a small detail about the environment they are in, like I have told you earlier. The second reason being drawing a lot of expression means he's having a chance to create some depth to the characters without using flashbacks, making them feel real to us to a certain extent without dragging out the story too much. Even the fights in Dragon Ball would follow this formula. Interpretation and explanation of an attack will often be cut off to leave the space for full-on action with some speed lines to add another layer of depth to the actions and the fight. To make it even more clear, when he sees a fight as important, he wouldn't mind spend a chapter at least to depict it. No characters will show up, and even if there are any, they wouldn't intervene whatsoever. The fight between Goku and King Chappa, between Goku and Vegeta, and between Vegeta and Rekkum are all becoming textbook in how to illustrate a fight beautifully. Later on in the series, when the characters can fly and shoot laser beam from their hand, the layout of the manga becomes even more important for the fluidity of the fight, because now, the opportunities for where the fight happens, and how it happens increase tremendously. Akira now has to depict the fight both at a close-up and at a full shot. Making the attack feel heavy is not enough, it needs to explode through the pages. And sometimes, the explosion does in fact explode throughout the pages so that we can grasp the full extent of the attack. The good thing about this is that because now, when characters fly or attack, there will be an aura around them. Which means Akira can further eliminate the need for special line effects, or speed lines, that other fighting manga often use, so that the readers can keep track of the fight and feel it on a much more realistic way possible. Another thing I really appreciate about the fights in Dragon Ball is that Akira usually doesn't draw one attack right after the other. Rather, he will draw a break, which can either depict the character moving, or preparing for the next attack, or sometimes just simply feeling the impact of the previous attack. This method brings about two benefits to the series. The first being that the readers can have a better interaction with the fight, in which they can use the break panel to feel the impact of the previous attack and anticipate the next one. The second being drawing the fight in this way does more justice to the characters, makes them feel more real to us, rather than some auto-punching machines that never rest and never get tired. But in order to have these achievements, Akira, in my opinion, has probably mastered the art of creating panels in manga. Contrary to a painting, where every subjects that the artist wants to include need to be present in full detail, the panels in a manga only serve as a fragment of the whole chapter, or even the whole story, so there is no need for a high level of detail. The selling point lies in the question of whether the chapter flows smoothly, or in other words, the panels have to be organized in a way that we can understand everything going on fully even when the story suddenly changes the focus to somewhere else. In this way, we can say that a manga artist has to have the eyes and skills of a movie director. Again, these aspects already exist long before Dragon Ball and will continue to exist after that. But the thing about Akira Toriyama and his series is that he standardizes some of the panels he uses, meaning oftentimes, certain panel arrangement would be used in very specific way with specific rules to follow. Some of the common way he organized his panels I can think of as a small and long rectangular box followed by a very big one to transition from a close-up to a wide shot with an aim to showing a new direction to the story. The next one is also a small and long rectangular box, but it lies vertical with a few small panels running parallel to the main scene happening in that box. A very good eye trick if you asked me. The last one is obviously an entire page dedicated to depicting a full-on transformation of a character. No matter whether they are protagonists or villain, the treatment is still the same. And as Dragon Ball went on to inspire other mangas, his way to organize the panels also soon became the standard in the industry. But Akira can do even more than that. Sometimes he can convey a whole story within just one page. Take this scene from the Majin Buu saga for instance. Here, after leaving, Mr. Satan is about to blow up the whole area that Buu is sitting with all the bombs he has previously placed nearby. Yet as he saw how happy Buu is when playing with the dog, something inside Satan has changed. He began to view Buu not as a monster who needs to be destroyed but rather just a normal kid who likes to play. So he decides to stop and tell himself that he would do it later because the dog is still nearby. We as the readers all know that kind of attack wouldn't do any significant damage to someone like Buu. Yet rather than let that kind of story repeat and take another page to resolve, Akira decides to turn it into a small and cute moment between Buu and Mr. Satan, and somehow changing our perspective about these two characters. This, again, is a foreshadow about their future friendship as later on when Kid Buu is about to beat Satan, Buu is the one coming out for help. And when Vegeta is about to kill Buu to prevent future disasters, Satan is the one risking his life begging Vegeta not to, as he believes that Buu is a good kid who's just being influenced by bad people. In another time, the entire page doesn't have any words, thus leaving the door open for our own interpretation. At the end of the Frieza saga, seeing how desperate Frieza is from his failing attack, Goku tries to let him live once more time, yet Frieza refuses to accept the fact that he isn't the strongest in the universe, so Goku has to do what is necessary and kill Frieza for good. In this page, all that's left of Frieza is just a giant hole coming from the attack. Goku then stays still for a moment, and we get this expression from him. What is he feeling exactly? Is he feeling angry that Frieza doesn't accept the fact that he lost? Or is he feeling pity for the fate of the one who used to be the strongest in the universe? We never know for sure. What we do know is that just like many deaths in the series, this is something that our main character quickly gets over and moves on with his life. But every manga artist is also an artist, so even when people prefer the full experience that a painting provides, Dragon Ball still has you covered. Akira can depict a scene like a wide shot in the movies with his character at the center from above or below to create a cinematic experience. Sometimes he can also fit either one or multiple characters in one page with their full bodies, as he usually does, so that we can have a sense of closure to the characters. What do they look like when they are alone? And what do they look like when they stand with other people? Speaking of drawing characters with their full bodies, having read a lot of manga since Dragon Ball, I still think that Dragon Ball also features some of the best transformations I've ever seen. When our characters transform into Super Saiyan, we can really feel the energy coming from them as their hair turns blonde, their eyes look more piercing, their shading becomes sharper, and their aura will be so strong that it creates a current of electricity around their body and a wind that blows the air around them away. Many famous manga I know seem to copy some elements from the Super Saiyan transformation when they draw a new form for their characters, but they all receive mixed opinions, as people will often compare them to the Super Saiyan, and often complaining about how it looks like a cheap knockoff or how it doesn't feel that strong of a transformation. Having given all the praise I have to Dragon Ball, now I think it's the time for me to present to you some issues I find with the series. The first and most obvious problem is definitely the power scaling of the main characters over time. Because every new arcs require a new villain that is stronger than the last to keep the hook strong, some of our characters have to get stronger as well. But some doesn't mean all. And many characters will be cast away to leave the stage for those who stay. This makes many characters that we know and love from the first half of the series like Yamcha and Tien take less spotlight and almost become irrelevant by the second half. Even the supporting characters that get many spotlight in the second half like Piccolo and Krillin just don't feel very significant in the last arc as well. Adding to this is the fact that the Dragon Balls, those that used to push the plot forward, become less and less important as all they can do later on is to revive dead people rather than fulfilling some meaningful wishes for the villains, making the series less of Goku and his friends going on an adventure and more of Goku and other Saiyans doing some gym to beat a dude in color. Obviously, by focusing on fewer characters, the readers will have a better understanding of the current story. We can tell who is currently the biggest threat and who is fighting who. This is especially true with weekly readers of the magazine, who have to keep track of every chapter and connect all of them into a coherent story. Besides, by focusing on fewer characters, Akira won't have to worry about whether or not he gives this character more spotlight than the others, or whether he spends too much time drawing side events instead of the main one. Again, in a certain series I know, the author just contains so many things within one arc that by the end of it, the readers have many mixed feelings about it. But there is definitely one thing they agree on. The arc would have been better if he could just narrow it down a little bit. However, it's still sad to see so much potential and characters of Dragon Ball getting wasted, especially when we now know how far the story can go with Dragon Ball GT and Dragon Ball Super. It's so interesting to know that after such a long time, there are still a lot of fanfics of Dragon Ball being around, each tackling either a small aspect of the series or continue it in a new direction. This just shows how rich the story of Dragon Ball and how dedicated the fanbase actually are. The second problem I find with the series lies in the fact that it is a weekly manga. This means the motivation to continue on with the series tends to die out as the stress from the weekly deadline becomes more and more apparent and unbearable to the artist, and the search for new ideas boils down to zero as the time went on. We can clearly feel this phenomenon happening in the last arc of Dragon Ball, the Majin Buu saga. Even though the first half of the arc is pretty amazing when setting up the main villain and getting a proper ending for Vegeta, we can still see that Akira just doesn't know what to do in the second half. There are too many setups with too little payoffs. Characters that are supposed to shine like Gohan just become another Piccolo, who gets written off easily. The last villain doesn't have any memorable traits, and the final attack isn't even Kamehameha. But I think the art is probably the clearest example of this drop in quality. The fight scene lacks the explosion that previously distinguishes Dragon Ball from other mangas. The boring special line effects appear more and more in the series, and in one chapter, Akira even apologizes for his boring copy-paste of what is going on in the chapter. Overall, the soul that went into making the series previously, what made it so great, now no longer exists. Yet, despite all the flaws above, when I closed the last volume of the series, I didn't feel sad nor disappointed at all. Aside from the proper and quite decent ending at the last arc, I felt another kind of satisfaction that only by rereading the series can a reader fully understand. Dragon Ball doesn't let our main protagonist, Goku, have any goals in his life like many protagonists nowadays usually do, and at the last page, it ends with Goku looking at his disciple while reminiscing about the journey he went through, the people that he met, the time that he trained, and the battles that he fought. They all become part of his identity, imprinted on his body over the years. We start the journey with him when he was 5 years old. He may be 60 by the end, and yet, he still wants to continue that journey. But this time, not as a fighter, but as a master. Piccolo probably sums up Goku's character quite well when he said that people like Goku just hates boredom. And so we are left with our own imagination of what that new journey could be and what the old journey has been. Some say Dragon Ball is a story about nature versus nurture. Others say it is a story about growing up and accepting the uncertainty of life. But to me, it comes across as a story about the life of an artist on the journey of perfecting the art. That's probably why Akira Toriyama can make such a compelling character like Goku. Like Goku, Toriyama is also an artist, though their field may be different. Like Goku, Toriyama also has some ups and downs in his career. And like Goku, Toriyama considers making art to be in his blood, to be his way of life, a means to communicate with people who share the same interests and a means to influence the world he lives in. That must be why Akira's depiction of martial art is so highly regarded and his writing on the people who practice this art is so beautiful. Because the villains are not the only highlights of the series. After all, they only stick with us for an arc or so, while the cast in Dragon Ball is much bigger. And I think we actually find more enjoyment in exploring the main cast, especially the morally gray characters who used to be Goku's enemies, as they're the ones that the series take multiple arcs to develop rather than just one. This could be Piccolo, a self-claimed demon lord, whose sole existence was to kill Goku and become the king of the world, has grown to have the humanity that he didn't know he has, while also becoming the master as well as somewhat of a foster father to Gohan, the son of his enemy. Or it could even be Vegeta, the prince of all the Saiyans, who used to look down on those he considered weak yet ends up having a family with a girl from the earth, who grows to accept that it's okay to not be the best. It's okay sometimes to put your ego aside for the common good. Because just the fact that you still have love in what you do, the fact that you are trying to be a better version of yourself every day, is good enough, and that is why Dragon Ball is so special to me.
Monumental can end, we all can. Everything does, you know? So man, like, he really had such a massive impact on, like, not just, like, not any one facet of it, but, like, culture in general. Like, Goku, you know? Like, fucking Goku. Fortnite's Goku! But, like, Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest, like, Jesus Christ, it's like an infinite reach he had. I don't think there's no single artist I can think of that is that influenced. Like, say, there's artists that are better known, like, you could say, like, fucking Taylor Swift is better known than Toriyama, right? Easily. But, like, is she as influential? Like, will she affect culture in the same way that he did? And I don't think she will. I don't think anyone does. And that's not a slight on Taylor, for the record. I enjoy myself some Blank Spaces. What a fantastic song. And it's like, you know, in so many ways, like, we're still kind of living in his world. He is a man who monumentally changed the landscape of popular culture, and you just don't think that he could die. Um, and it's fucking crazy that he did, and it's crazy and it's tragic in a different way to someone like Miura, because Miura did not get to finish his story, and you know that is that is tragic in a way that I am still processing. But then with Toriyama, you look at him and you're like, there's a man who did it as hard as anyone ever could. Like, in terms of succeeding in your field, no one will ever do it harder than Toriyama. He is as monumental and important to, you know, the landscape of anime and manga as the fucking ocean is to the planet, you know? And it's hard because, like, you know there's going to be more Dragon Ball movies, you know there's going to be more, like, games based on his stuff, but he's not going to be a part of them anymore. And it makes me real excited for the next Dragon Quest, because it's like that game was far along in production. I'm going to assume that like a lot of his work was done on it, and we're going to see his designs. You know, we're going to see the last of what he did, and there's going to be a real bittersweet element to that. It's crazy, like it is fucking crazy. But it's like, you know, obviously I never met Toriyama, or like I never had anything to do with him personally. But Jesus Christ, like, talk about someone who had a genuinely profound effect on the direction of my life, and I will always be so thankful of that. So thankful to that dude, because my fucking god, he made something that mattered in every way it could. And I think that's about all I gotta say. Um, there is a very particular way I wanted to salute Toriyama on this stream. Yeah, like okay, air to Twitch. His works opened up anime to America hugely, massively so. You look at like different cultures and their reverence from Goku. My parents are on holiday in Argentina, and they were saying there's like a day of mourning for Toriyama in Argentina. There's like all these tributes and all this shit, you know. And it's incredible. It's incredible. And like, you know, like if you ever read Gita Jackson's article on like, you know, what like Goku meant to like black men, oh, fucking, it was so much. But anyway, there's a very particular way I wanted to salute Toriyama on this stream. There's a video that we watch here every couple of months, and I think to some people this might even seem like a little, I don't know, like disrespectful. It is not. It genuinely is not. But there's an AMV, my favorite Dragon Ball Z AMV that I have watched maybe 200 times, called Vegeta's Sacrifice. And as silly as it is, I think I got I think I just got to watch it on stream. It's the Vegeta AMV, you know? Um and it's silly, but it just feels right, you know? Fuck it, let's turn it on. 240p, baby, perfect. Okay. Look at that. Just beautiful.
I awoke one day to find that I had settled down, formed a family. I had even grown quite fond of them.
240p as God intended. Chat, I don't even fucking care. There is something so magical about this AMV. I love it so much. When I really think back to like what Dragon Ball Z was, like to me as a teenager, fuck, there are few pieces of media I have been that in love with. Lazarus of Gnome, man, this just hits the feels hard. Guys, I'm like getting proper emotional watching this. Like, I haven't watched this since Toriyama died. And fuck, it's all coming back, chat. Prodigy, DBZ is in some way responsible for every Jack dude aged 25 to 40, 100%. Fuck, man, Jesus.